The moment he saw her again, Ryan Carter realized the divorce had not ended the story the way he thought it had. The ballroom shimmered beneath 1,000 points of golden light. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors while servers moved silently between groups of executives, investors, and entrepreneurs dressed in tailored suits and evening gowns. It was the kind of event Ryan loved attending. Success filled the room. Power filled the room. Opportunity filled the room. 5 years earlier, he had imagined this exact future for himself. And tonight, standing near the center of one of Chicago's most exclusive business galas, he believed he had achieved it. His company had grown steadily. His income had doubled. His professional network stretched farther than ever before. By every visible measure, life had worked out exactly as planned. Ryan accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server and exchanged greetings with several familiar faces. The atmosphere felt comfortable, predictable, controlled. Then everything changed in a single moment. He noticed heads turning near the entrance. Not dramatically, just enough to catch his attention. Conversations paused for a second. A few guests smiled in recognition. Others stepped aside. Curious, Ryan glanced toward the grand staircase leading into the ballroom. At first he did not recognize her. The woman descending the steps moved with a quiet confidence that seemed completely natural. She was elegant without trying to be noticed, composed without appearing distant. Her dark blue evening dress was simple, refined, and perfectly suited to the event. Soft lighting caught the gentle movement of her hair as she greeted several guests near the entrance. Ryan stared. His grip tightened slightly around the glass. Emily. For a moment, the noise of the ballroom seemed to disappear. 5 years vanished in an instant. He remembered the final day of their marriage. He remembered the silence that filled the house after she left. He remembered watching her load a few suitcases into her car, while convincing himself he felt relief. At the time, he believed the divorce was proof that they simply wanted different things. More truthfully, he believed he had outgrown the marriage. Emily had always seemed too cautious, too quiet, too content with ordinary life. Ryan wanted bigger goals, bigger opportunities, bigger dreams. At least that was what he told himself. Yet the woman standing across the ballroom looked nothing like the person he remembered. She was not trying to impress anyone. That was what unsettled him most. People were approaching her naturally. Business leaders, investors, philanthropists. They greeted her with genuine warmth. Some even appeared excited to see her. Ryan frowned. How did she know these people? More importantly, why did she look so completely at ease among them? Emily laughed softly at something an older woman said. The smile on her face was effortless, not forced, not performative, genuine. Ryan felt a strange discomfort settle into his chest. It was not jealousy. At least that was what he told himself. It was curiosity, nothing more. Then Emily turned slightly toward someone standing just outside his view. Her expression changed. The smile became warmer, more personal. Ryan followed her gaze. He could not see who she was looking at. Only the edge of a dark suit disappearing behind a group of guests. Whoever the man was, Emily seemed genuinely happy to see him. And for reasons he could not explain, Ryan suddenly found himself far more interested in this evening than he had been only minutes before. Ryan told himself he was only curious. Nothing more. Yet 10 minutes later, he was still watching Emily from across the ballroom. The annual gala continued around him in a blur of conversations, laughter, and business introductions. But his attention kept drifting back toward her. She stood near a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the Chicago skyline, speaking with a small group of guests. Every few minutes, someone new approached her. Not because she demanded attention. Quite the opposite. People seemed drawn to her naturally. Ryan found that difficult to understand. 5 years ago, Emily had never enjoyed events like this. She preferred quiet weekends, neighborhood coffee shops, and evenings at home. Corporate galas had always been his world, not hers. Watching her now felt strangely unsettling. It was as if he had opened a familiar book only to discover someone had rewritten entire chapters. A server passed by carrying a tray of appetizers. Ryan absent-mindedly took one without looking. His mind had already drifted backward. Memories surfaced whether he wanted them to or not. The final year of their marriage had been filled with small disappointments. At least that was how he remembered it. He had become consumed by growth targets, investor meetings, and endless travel. Every promotion felt like proof that he was building something important. Emily had never opposed his ambitions, but she often questioned the cost. He remembered late dinners growing cold on the kitchen table, conversations interrupted by business calls, vacations canceled because opportunities seemed more urgent. At the time, Ryan believed sacrifice was temporary. Success would make everything worthwhile. Emily disagreed. Their arguments were rarely dramatic. In some ways, that made them worse. There were no shouting matches, no explosive confrontations, just long silences that seemed to grow larger every month. Eventually, those silences became a permanent part of the marriage. The divorce itself had been surprisingly calm. Friends described it as mature, civil, efficient. Ryan remembered signing documents inside a downtown office and feeling relieved afterward. Free even. He had convinced himself they were simply incompatible. Emily wanted one kind of life. He wanted another. The decision felt logical, necessary. Looking back now, he realized how completely certain he had been. That certainty had followed him for years. It allowed him to move forward without regret. Until tonight. Across the room, Emily laughed at something one of the guests said. The expression reached her eyes. Ryan noticed because he had not seen that smile in a very long time. It was not the polite smile she used during networking events. It was genuine happiness, the kind that could not be rehearsed. A strange feeling settled into his chest. Not jealousy. Not exactly. More like confusion. How had she changed this much? More importantly, when had it happened? His thoughts were interrupted when a colleague approached him. Ryan, have you met some of the new guests tonight? Ryan shook his head. Not yet. The colleague glanced toward the far side of the ballroom. There are some very influential people here this year. Ryan followed his gaze automatically. Once again, his eyes found Emily. Except this time she was no longer alone. A tall man in a dark tailored suit had joined her group. Ryan could only see him from behind. The man leaned slightly toward Emily as she spoke, listening with complete attention. Whatever she said caused him to smile. Emily smiled back. The interaction lasted only a few seconds, yet something about it immediately caught Ryan's attention. For reasons he could not explain, he suddenly wanted to know exactly who that man was. The man remained frustratingly difficult to see. Every time Ryan shifted position in the ballroom, another guest seemed to step into the way. A group of investors blocked the view. Then a photographer moved through the crowd. Then several executives stopped to greet Emily and the mysterious man at the same time. It felt almost ridiculous, yet Ryan could not ignore the growing curiosity pulling at his attention. He moved toward a different section of the ballroom under the pretense of greeting clients. The annual gala occupied nearly the entire top floor of the luxury hotel. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glittering skyline beyond the glass, while soft jazz drifted through the room. Conversations blended into a constant hum of ambition and success. Normally, Ryan thrived in environments like this. Tonight, however, his focus had narrowed to a single question. Who was standing beside Emily? As he approached a group of business associates near the center of the room, he caught another glimpse. The man appeared to be in his early 40s. Tall, confident without appearing arrogant. His dark suit was perfectly tailored but understated. Nothing flashy. Nothing designed to attract attention. Yet people noticed him anyway. Ryan watched several guests approach him with genuine respect. Not the exaggerated politeness people often displayed toward wealthy individuals. This felt different. Familiar. As if many of them already knew him well. Emily stood comfortably at his side. Not clinging to him. Not performing for anyone. Simply present. The ease between them immediately stood out. Ryan found himself remembering details he had not thought about in years. During the final months of his marriage, interactions with Emily often felt strained. Every conversation seemed to require effort. Every shared event carried invisible tension. Looking across the ballroom now, he saw none of that. Emily looked relaxed. Lighter somehow. As though she had left a weight behind years ago. A woman standing beside Ryan noticed where he was looking. Beautiful couple, aren't they? She said casually before taking a sip of her drink. Ryan looked at her. You know them? The woman smiled. A little. Then someone called her name, and she disappeared into the crowd before he could ask another question. Beautiful couple. The words lingered longer than he expected. Ryan immediately dismissed the reaction rising inside him. Emily had every right to move on. 5 years had passed. He had dated after the divorce himself. There was nothing unusual about that. Nothing that should matter. Yet something still felt different. He glanced toward the ballroom entrance where a large donor recognition display had been set up for the evening's charity fundraiser. Several names appeared alongside major contributions. Ryan recognized many of them. Industry leaders, real estate developers, technology founders. Then he noticed something strange. Emily's name appeared among them. Not near the bottom, near the top. Ryan stared for a second to make sure he had read it correctly. Emily Carter. A substantial contribution listed beside it, far larger than he would have expected. His first thought was that there must be some mistake. His second thought was even more unsettling. Maybe there was not. Before he could process it further, movement near the ballroom windows caught his eye. The mysterious man had shifted position. For the first time, Ryan saw part of his face clearly. Only for a moment before another guest interrupted the view. But it was enough to notice something important. The man was not simply another wealthy attendee. Several influential executives had begun moving toward him, not the other way around. And judging by their expressions, they were eager to speak with him. Ryan tried to return his attention to the reason he had attended the gala in the first place. He exchanged business cards. He participated in conversations. He nodded through discussions about investments and market forecasts. Yet every few minutes, his eyes drifted back toward Emily. The more he watched her, the more something felt different. It was not her appearance, although she carried herself with a confidence he did not remember. It was not the elegant dress or the attention she received. It was the fact that she seemed completely comfortable being herself. Years ago, Emily often stood quietly at the edges of events like this. She had never been shy, but she never appeared interested in competing for attention. Tonight she looked entirely at ease, as if she belonged exactly where she was. Ryan found himself wondering when that transformation had happened. Had it begun immediately after the divorce? Had it taken years? Had he simply never paid attention? The questions became increasingly difficult to ignore. Near the center of the ballroom, the mysterious man remained close to Emily's group. Ryan noticed something unusual. The man rarely approached anyone. Instead, people approached him. Executives, investors, board members, individuals whose names regularly appeared in business publications. One after another, they crossed the room to greet him. Some shook his hand warmly. Others waited patiently for an opportunity to speak with him. Whatever influence he possessed, it was substantial. Ryan felt his curiosity deepen. He casually approached a conversation circle near the donor display where several guests were discussing the charity auction. The discussion soon shifted toward notable attendees. Someone mentioned a technology founder. Another mentioned a real estate developer. Then a woman standing beside Ryan smiled and glanced across the ballroom. "There are some remarkable people here tonight," she said. "Especially him." Ryan followed her gaze. Once again, she was looking toward the same man standing near Emily. "Do you know him?" Ryan asked. The woman laughed softly. "Not personally. Most people wish they did." Before Ryan could ask another question, someone interrupted their conversation and she moved away. The answer only increased his frustration. He checked the event program on his phone. Hundreds of names appeared. Sponsors, donors, guests, speakers. Yet none of them immediately stood out as a likely match. Across the room, Emily appeared to notice someone approaching. Her expression brightened. The mysterious man turned toward her. For the first time that evening, Ryan saw them interacting without other guests crowding around them. Their conversation looked effortless, familiar, comfortable. They were not trying to impress each other. They were simply enjoying each other's company. That realization bothered Ryan more than he expected. He remembered the final months of his marriage all too clearly. Conversations with Emily had often felt rushed because he was always focused on the next meeting, the next opportunity, the next goal. Looking at her now, he suddenly wondered how many moments he had overlooked while chasing things he considered more important. A burst of applause interrupted his thoughts. Near the stage, the event host was preparing to begin a recognition ceremony for major contributors. Guests gradually moved closer. Emily and the man joined the crowd as well. Ryan followed from a distance. As the room settled into silence, the host began acknowledging several influential figures whose generosity had supported the evening's charitable mission. Then the host smiled and looked toward the audience. "We are especially grateful for the continued support of one individual whose leadership has transformed countless lives." The crowd immediately turned toward a familiar section of the ballroom. Ryan followed their gaze. And for the first time that evening, The mysterious man stepped fully into view. The room erupted into applause. Ryan turned his attention fully toward the stage as the event host smiled and gestured toward the crowd. The mysterious man stepped forward with the kind of confidence that came from years of experience rather than a desire for attention. For the first time that evening, Ryan saw him clearly. He appeared composed and approachable, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that looked expensive without trying to advertise itself. The audience response immediately confirmed what Ryan had already begun to suspect. This was not an ordinary guest. The host continued speaking while the applause gradually faded. For nearly a decade, his leadership, generosity, and vision have helped fund educational programs, community initiatives, and opportunities for thousands of people. More applause followed. Ryan watched as the man accepted the recognition with a modest smile. There was no dramatic speech, no attempt to dominate the spotlight. In fact, he seemed almost uncomfortable being the center of attention. That detail surprised Ryan. Many successful people loved public recognition. This man appeared eager for the ceremony to end. Once the presentation concluded, guests immediately began moving toward him. Ryan noticed something else. Emily remained where she was. She did not rush forward like everyone else. She simply waited. The man eventually made his way back through the crowd and returned directly to her. The interaction lasted only a few seconds, but it revealed more than any introduction could have. He seemed genuinely relieved to be standing beside her again. Ryan felt another unfamiliar discomfort settle into his chest. He looked away and focused on a conversation happening nearby. Two executives were discussing a potential partnership. Normally, he would have joined immediately. Instead, he found himself distracted by a name he still did not know. Several minutes later, opportunity arrived unexpectedly. One of Ryan's longtime business contacts approached him carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. "Enjoying the evening?" the man asked. Ryan nodded. "Absolutely." The contact smiled and glanced toward the crowd surrounding the mysterious guest. Quite a turnout for Alexander. Ryan froze internally while keeping his expression neutral. "Alexander." Finally, a name. "You know him?" Ryan asked casually. The man laughed. "Everyone in this room knows him." Ryan waited. "Alexander Reed?" The man looked surprised. "Of course. One of the most respected executives in the country." Ryan's pulse quickened slightly. He knew the name immediately. Almost everyone in his industry did. Alexander Reed had built one of the most successful consulting and technology groups in North America. Business magazines featured him regularly. Universities invited him to speak. Major corporations sought his advice. Ryan had followed his career for years. Not obsessively, but enough to understand the scale of his success. The realization hit harder than expected. He looked across the ballroom toward Emily and Alexander. Suddenly, the evening felt different. This was no longer simple curiosity about an unfamiliar man. This was someone whose accomplishments had earned admiration throughout the business world. Yet what unsettled Ryan most was not Alexander's reputation. It was Emily's presence beside him. She was not standing there as a fan, not as an employee, not as someone hoping to gain access to his network. She stood beside him as an equal, comfortable, confident, entirely at home. As Ryan processed the revelation, he noticed something else. Across the room, several powerful executives were waiting patiently for an opportunity to speak with Alexander. But Alexander was not paying attention to them. His attention remained focused on Emily. And for the first time all evening, Ryan began to wonder whether the most important story in that ballroom had nothing to do with Alexander's success at all. The discovery should have satisfied Ryan's curiosity. Instead, it created even more questions. Knowing the man's identity only made the situation harder to understand. Alexander Reed was not someone people casually met at charity events. He was not the type of executive who appeared unexpectedly in someone's social circle. His schedule alone was the subject of articles and interviews. Yet here he was, spending most of the evening standing beside Emily, as though there was nowhere else he would rather be. Ryan found himself replaying every memory he had of her. The contrast was impossible to ignore. During their marriage, Emily had often been overlooked by the people Ryan considered important. She attended company events because he asked her to. She supported his ambitions without complaint. She remembered names, birthdays, and details about people he barely noticed. Looking back now, Ryan realized how many things she quietly managed while he focused on advancing his career. At the time, he assumed those efforts were ordinary. Tonight, he was beginning to wonder if he had mistaken value for familiarity. Across the ballroom, Alexander and Emily moved through the crowd. What struck Ryan most was the consistency of their interactions. Whenever someone approached Alexander, he acknowledged them respectfully. But after a brief conversation, his attention always returned to Emily. It happened again and again. At one point, a senior executive from a Fortune 500 company interrupted them. The conversation lasted several minutes. Yet the moment it ended, Alexander turned back toward Emily and resumed the discussion they had been having before. It was a small detail. Most people would never notice it. Ryan did. Years earlier, Emily used to complain that she felt invisible whenever work became his priority. He had dismissed those concerns. Looking at Alexander now, Ryan suddenly understood what she meant. Nearby, several guests were discussing a philanthropic initiative supported by Alexander's foundation. Emily contributed thoughtfully to the conversation. To Ryan's surprise, people listened carefully when she spoke. Not because she was associated with Alexander, because they genuinely respected her perspective. More than once, he noticed influential individuals asking for her opinion directly. That realization unsettled him in a way he could not fully explain. The woman he remembered had never sought attention. Yet she had somehow become someone people naturally listened to. A short while later, Ryan overheard part of a conversation taking place near the donor display. Two guests were discussing Emily. She has done incredible work over the past few years, one of them said. The education initiative? The other replied. Exactly. Thousands of students have benefited from it. Ryan frowned. Education initiative? He had no idea what they were talking about. The conversation moved on before he could learn more. Another missing piece. Another reminder that an entire chapter of Emily's life existed without him. The realization lingered. For years, Ryan had viewed the divorce as a closed chapter, a finished story. He moved forward believing he understood how everything ended. Standing in this ballroom now, surrounded by people who clearly admired and respected Emily, he was beginning to see a different possibility. Perhaps the story had continued after he stopped paying attention. Perhaps the most important chapters had been written long after she walked away. As those thoughts settled into his mind, he looked across the room once more. Emily was laughing softly at something Alexander had said. Neither seemed aware of the attention they attracted. Neither appeared interested in impressing anyone. And for the first time that evening, Ryan felt something more uncomfortable than curiosity. He felt the growing realization that he knew far less about Emily Carter than he ever believed possible. The evening continued, but for Ryan, the atmosphere had changed completely. Earlier, he had viewed the gala as another networking opportunity. Now it felt like a window into a life he had never imagined Emily would build. The more he learned, the more difficult it became to reconcile the woman standing across the ballroom with the memories he carried from their marriage. He found himself paying attention to details he would normally ignore. The way people greeted her, the way they listened when she spoke, the way they seemed genuinely happy to see her. None of it looked forced. None of it appeared connected solely to Alexander's reputation. Emily had earned her own place in this room. That realization stayed with him. Near the donor display, a presentation highlighting several charitable initiatives began playing on large screens positioned around the ballroom. Guests paused to watch. Images of community programs, scholarship recipients, and educational workshops appeared one after another. Ryan only glanced at the screens at first. Then a familiar face appeared. Emily. He looked again. There was no mistake. She stood inside a classroom surrounded by students. Another image followed. Emily speaking at a community event. Another. Emily helping launch a mentoring program. The montage lasted less than a minute, but it left Ryan staring at the screen long after it ended. A guest standing nearby noticed his reaction. She has changed a lot of lives, the woman said. Ryan looked at her. Emily, of course. The woman smiled. Most people know Alexander Reed, but many of us know Emily because of her work. Ryan hesitated. What exactly does she do? The woman appeared surprised by the question. She helped build one of the most successful education outreach programs in the region. Ryan felt a strange mixture of curiosity and disbelief. During their marriage, Emily had always cared deeply about helping others. She volunteered regularly. She mentored students when she could. Yet he had never imagined those interests would eventually grow into something this significant. The woman continued. She never talks about herself, though. That is probably why you have not heard much." Then she excused herself and disappeared into the crowd. Ryan remained where he was. For years, he had measured success through revenue, growth charts, and professional recognition. Looking around the ballroom, he suddenly realized Emily had achieved something equally meaningful through an entirely different path. The realization unsettled him more than he expected. Across the room, Alexander and Emily stood near one of the windows overlooking the city. The crowd surrounding them had finally thinned. They appeared deep in conversation. Whatever they were discussing seemed entirely disconnected from the social performance happening around them. At one point, Emily laughed. Alexander laughed too. The moment looked effortless. Real. Ryan felt an uncomfortable memory surface. Years ago, Emily used to laugh that way with him. Before the deadlines. Before the constant travel. Before every conversation became secondary to work. He quickly pushed the thought aside. Regret served no purpose. The marriage had ended years ago. Both of them had moved on. Yet despite telling himself that, he could not ignore the growing awareness settling inside him. This was no longer simply a story about a successful executive dating his former wife. It was something much harder to confront. Emily had become the person she was always capable of becoming. And standing there beneath the glow of the city lights, surrounded by people who valued her for exactly who she was, she seemed happier than he had ever seen her before. The realization was painful for one reason. Ryan was beginning to understand that the most important thing Alexander Reed had discovered about Emily was something Ryan himself had failed to appreciate when he had the chance. As the evening approached its final hour, the ballroom settled into a more relaxed rhythm. Formal presentations had ended. Guests gathered in smaller circles. Conversations became more personal. Through the towering windows, the lights of Chicago stretched across the horizon like a sea of stars. Ryan stood near one of the marble columns, quietly observing the room around him. For the first time all night, he stopped trying to learn who Alexander Reed was. That mystery had already been solved. Instead, he found himself thinking about a different question. Why Emily? The answer seemed obvious at first. She was intelligent, kind, capable. Yet the more he watched them together, the more he realized that Alexander was responding to qualities far deeper than appearances or accomplishments. Emily never seemed interested in impressing him. She never tried to draw attention to herself. She did not position herself at the center of every conversation. In a room filled with ambitious people competing for influence, she remained entirely comfortable being authentic. That authenticity appeared to be exactly what Alexander valued most. The realization hit Ryan harder than any business achievement or public recognition could have. Years ago, Emily had possessed those same qualities. He simply stopped noticing them. A burst of laughter drew his attention toward a nearby conversation. Several guests were discussing the origin of the education initiative Emily had helped create. Ryan listened quietly from a distance. One woman described how the program began with a small volunteer effort. Another explained how Emily had spent years expanding it. Then someone mentioned Alexander. He invested in the project because he believed in her vision, a man said. Not the other way around. Ryan felt something shift inside him. That single sentence revealed more than any formal introduction could have. He had assumed Alexander's success elevated Emily's position. The truth appeared to be the opposite. Alexander had recognized her value long before anyone else was talking about it. Nearby, Emily and Alexander continued speaking with several guests. At one point, an older philanthropist approached them. The woman greeted Alexander warmly before turning toward Emily. What happened next caught Ryan completely off guard. The philanthropist thanked Emily for inspiring one of the foundation's largest educational partnerships. Not Alexander. Emily. Alexander simply smiled while listening. There was no hint of insecurity. No need to redirect attention toward himself. He looked genuinely proud of her accomplishments. Ryan lowered his eyes for a moment. Memories surfaced again. During his marriage, he had often viewed success as something individual. Personal goals, personal achievements, personal advancement. Watching Alexander now, Ryan realized there was another way to measure success. Not by standing above someone, by standing beside them. The thought lingered. A short while later, guests began preparing to leave. Coats were collected. Final conversations were exchanged. Near the ballroom entrance, Emily and Alexander paused before departing. The crowd around them had thinned considerably. For a brief moment, The two stood alone beneath the warm glow of the chandeliers. Alexander looked at Emily with unmistakable admiration, not because of what she could offer him, not because of her connections, not because of her accomplishments, simply because of who she was. Emily returned the look with a quiet smile, the kind of smile that comes from feeling fully seen and appreciated. Ryan watched the moment unfold from across the room. There was nothing dramatic about it, no grand gesture, no public declaration. Yet somehow that simple exchange carried more meaning than anything else he had witnessed all evening. And in that moment, Ryan finally understood what hurt the most. Alexander Reed had not discovered a different version of Emily. He had simply recognized the version that had been there all along. Guests gradually filtered toward the exits as the gala came to an end. The energy that had filled the ballroom throughout the evening softened into a quieter rhythm. Conversations became shorter. Handshakes turned into farewells. Beyond the enormous windows, the city lights reflected against the dark waters of Lake Michigan. Ryan remained where he was for a few moments longer, watching the final pieces of the evening unfold. Across the room, Emily and Alexander were preparing to leave. There was nothing dramatic about the scene. No grand announcement. No attempt to attract attention. Yet somehow they remained the most noticeable people in the ballroom. Perhaps because they appeared completely unaffected by everything around them. They were not chasing recognition. They were not trying to impress anyone. They simply seemed content to share the same space. As guests stopped to say goodbye, Ryan noticed a pattern one final time. People respected Alexander, but they genuinely cared about Emily. The difference mattered. Earlier in his life, Ryan might not have understood that distinction. Tonight he understood it perfectly. He slowly walked toward the coat check area. Along the way, he passed several displays highlighting the evening's charitable projects. One featured photographs from educational programs that Emily had helped create. He stopped briefly and studied the images. Students smiling beside scholarship certificates. Mentors guiding young professionals. Community events bringing people together. The photographs told a story no financial statement ever could. A story measured not in revenue or status, but in impact. Ryan felt an unexpected sense of humility. Years ago, he believed success followed a very specific path. Bigger offices, bigger titles, bigger achievements. Looking around now, he realized Emily had built something meaningful without following any of those rules. She had not become impressive because of who she was dating. She had become impressive because of who she had become. The distinction changed everything. Near the entrance, Emily and Alexander collected their coats. For a brief moment, Emily looked across the room and her eyes met Ryan's. The distance between them was only a few yards, yet it felt much larger. 5 years of separate lives stood in that space. 5 years of choices, growth, mistakes, lessons. Neither of them looked away immediately. There was no anger in Emily's expression, no desire for revenge, no satisfaction at being seen this way. If anything, her expression carried a quiet peace. The kind of peace that comes from no longer needing validation from the past. Ryan offered a small nod. Emily returned it. Nothing more. No conversation followed. None was necessary. Some truths did not require words. Emily turned back toward Alexander. A moment later, the two of them stepped through the ballroom doors and disappeared into the corridor beyond. Ryan stood there watching until they were gone. Then he looked around the nearly empty room. Earlier that evening, he believed he had stumbled onto a surprising story about his former wife. Now he understood that the surprise was not Alexander Reed. It was Emily. Alexander had simply been the mirror reflecting a truth Ryan had failed to see. The woman he once considered too quiet, too cautious, too ordinary had gone on to build a life filled with purpose, respect, and genuine happiness. Not because someone rescued her. Not because she needed revenge. But because she kept moving forward after everyone else stopped watching. Ryan finally turned toward the exit. The city waited outside, glowing beneath the night sky. As he stepped into the corridor, one final realization settled quietly into his mind. He had spent years believing he won the divorce because he moved on first. Tonight, he understood something very different. Winning was never about who left first. It was about who continued growing after the ending. And somewhere along the way, Emily Carter had done exactly that.